You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest, Pasi Sahlberg, has written a book called Finnish Lessons. And the Finnish school system is ranked number 2 in the world behind only China, but there's a caveat. China cheats. They only allow people in Shanghai to take the test. And I don't know if you know this, but it's a vast area. So I'm going to call the Finnish school system the number 1 school system in the world. And I don't know who makes these quantifications or who picks the categories, but I am sure that the American school system has much to learn from the book Finnish Lessons and this Finnish school system. So, Pasi, Professor, Lord of Education in Finland, Viking that you are.
All right.
My friend, talk to us, educate us, teach us what we have to learn. I know now, I think you're at Harvard and you are a visiting professor and you're trying to change the world.
Yeah, I'll do my share.
Such a Finnish response.
I
Very
know.
modest.
Very modest. Yeah, talk to us a little bit about, I guess the first thing I want to know is how does the Finnish school system, for people who've not yet read the book, how does it differ from the American school system?
Let me start by what you just said about these rankings, that Finland, in your rankings, Finland is number 1, but in somebody else's rankings, that's not the case. But you know what surprises many people when they kind of dive deeper into the Finnish thinking of education is that there are practically nobody in my country who would really care about the international rankings where Finland is. Probably except the fact that we want to be better than Sweden. but other than that, you know, if we are number 5 or 10 or something like that, that's not really how we think about education. And what surprises me in many parts of the world, increasingly now because of this focus on these international assessments and competitions, is how much people are thinking about their own education systems in terms of where they stand in these rankings. And my reading often here in the United States is that this is actually a big part of your problem here, is that you think too much about, you care too much about what is your kind of a position in these international league tables, and that is kind of taking away the attention from many other important things like, what has made Finland great during the course of the last 30 or 40 years is to be serious and honest with the question of, how does the education system look like that will help every single child to be successful. And that's why I think that the first thing that people should realize with the countries like Finland and also actually with many of these countries that have joined Finland there on the top of these league tables, like Singapore or South Korea, Japan, or even China, is that these countries don't really want to be there, or they never aim to be number 1. So the success of Finland is not
Korea.
We wanted to be number 1.
Korea may be an exception. I mean, Korea has a very high suicide rate among industrialized nations, and it's a lot to do with testing, right?
Sure. Yeah, but there are two different things.
Yes,
the Korean problem that you mentioned is because of their own domestic examination and testing system.
Right.
It's not because of this international thing.
I
But
see. Yeah.
I meet a lot of people, education leaders and educators from these countries, and it's a very interesting thing actually that none of these successful education systems that you find in the top of these league tables, none of them actually aim to be there. They never had a plan to be there. And even more interestingly, none of those countries that have seriously tried to climb up in the ladder and be there have never went there. So this indicates that there's something fundamentally wrong in the way policymakers and politicians and education leaders think about education. As a kind of it's almost
a
like
competition,
a beauty competition.
Yeah, like the Olympics or something.
Exactly, and education is not. People should understand that education is not a competition. It's something that we do together and learn from one another. And the second thing that many people, when they study Finland, that this Finnish ask this question, what has made Finland there, is that we have built much of our success and this goodness of our education system on American innovations and ideas. It's not made in Finland inventions and and innovation. It's very much things designed and invented here in the United States that we have put in place exactly the same way as all the other successful countries, including Canada, for example.
Wow. That's surprising. Well, give me some examples of what you've taken from the United States and applied to your education system.
Okay. The best example probably that I can find is the whole set of different methods of teaching and the models of teaching that have been developed and researched here in the United States extensively during the last 100 years. The best example is a thing that we call cooperative learning. That is a truly an American invention in somewhere in 1960s, 60s or 70s, that was invented and researched here in different universities, like the University of Minnesota, for example, that has never really found a place in American educational practice, like a system-wide, that you can find pockets of good practices of cooperative learning and small teamwork in schools here and there in the United States.
And the idea behind cooperative learning is because usually when you're in the workplace, for example, things get done as a group. There's a wisdom in crowds. Is that the idea?
Exactly, and even more than that, because the American research and international research actually very clearly shows that when students are learning in small groups and when it's done in a kind of a systematic and wise way, the learning outcomes at the individual level are much higher than they would be without this, if the kids were working individually. But you know that what Finland has done with this American innovation is that we realized about 20 years ago that this is a great idea, and the research is supporting this widely, that the small group learning produces better results than individual learning in all subjects. So we put this in a scale, in a kind of a national scale, so that every school in Finland is aware of this and has resources, and that's why they're actually practicing this great American idea.
That's amazing. So you'll give students in a small group a problem to solve, and you say go solve it, essentially.
Yeah, basically like this. And even I used to teach mathematics many years in Finnish schools, and I was doing most of my stuff in the classrooms, relying on these American designed and developed methods of small group learning and cooperative learning in mathematics. Even, in the simple cases like having two students working on the same problem and talking and communicating about this thing.
Yeah,
when they
makes
learn.
Sense. It seems to me that when they put that rover on Mars, or they put that rover on that comet, that was a group effort. I mean, these things aren't being done by one person in a room.
Innovation is never a kind of an individual thing, and this is what many people misunderstand, that they insist that the kids have to perform individually in a standardized test.
But isn't that part of the American character? As you're talking, I'm wondering, because it's interesting that it was invented by America, but somehow it didn't really take hold in this country. But it did in what seems to be perhaps more of an egalitarian society like Finland, a more homogenous society. I wonder if that plays a factor.
Yeah, well, the other thing that I'm surprised here in the United States is that I have learned to understand that the United States is one of the most individualistic countries, where the individual has a right. It's a kind of a basic value here. But the education system is not. It's one of the most standardized education systems in the world, where the aim of education, schooling, is to try to produce kind of a similar type of outcomes in the education in a very standardized way. Whereas in Finland, if you look at the Finnish school system, it's one of the most individualized in the world, because we are trying to educate everybody to be different and everybody to find their own talent and find their own way, rather than here, where the standardization is kind of squeezing this whole system into one kind of a single model.
Well, and there you have that great line in there in the book. I think it's from your grandmother: "When everybody thinks the same, nobody really thinks at all."
Exactly. Yeah. That's how she taught me to think about education.
Yeah, and in terms of trying to really individualize education, I think one of the things that's most surprising about the Finnish system that really comes out of the book is the amount of sort of special needs education that is provided, and also the way that it's structured. Because in the United States, a kid is labeled as special needs and then sort of permanently dumped in that category. Whereas in Finland, a lot of that stigma is reduced because there's a real specificity of where do people need sort of extra support. You help them with that for a period of time, and then, they sort of go into and go out of regular classes. So they might be in some sort of special support class for, their reading comprehension, but then they're in a perfectly normal class for math.
And my guess is that you do it with less money than the Americans.
Right. And Finland is full of these interesting paradoxes, and one of these paradoxes is this how we have employed the special education system within a school system, because in Finland we say that special education is for everybody. So we try to include as many kids as we can into the special education, and we have been doing it to the point right now where most of the junior high school graduates, when they leave the school system at the age of 16, most of them have had some type of special education support and help during the course of their schooling, which means that you are actually a special student or pupil if you haven't had any special education, which is a kind of a paradox.
But it goes back, it sounds like, somebody out there in Finland took the time to realize that, first of all, intelligence is compartmentalized. Mm-hmm. Kids concentrate on the things they're interested in. They follow their curiosity. And all of these things, which first of all is a little bit surprising to me, because Finland was essentially a socialist country for so long, or at least maybe even a communist country for a while.
We don't take me there.
No. I hear you.
There we end up talking about everything else except education.
No. You're right. No, I'm just impressed, and I'm impressed that sort of these ideas took such firm footing. And they're bearing fruit like this.
But I would also, I don't know that it's necessarily that they took such firm footing. I think what's great about the Finnish educational system is that there's a degree of humility and a degree to which they're constantly exploring and constantly trying to figure out and constantly listening and interacting. And even the level of buy-in that teachers have, where teachers are actively designed in building the school. Mm-hmm. Like when they build a new school, they consult with the teachers to figure out what the building should look like, because obviously the teachers have local knowledge that some architect in Helsinki doesn't necessarily have.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. No, I think in the end of the day, this whole thinking of building a successful education system, particularly in the Finnish case, it's a very simple thing. It's not rocket science. It's being humble with the question. And not to forget the question that we always need to do things that are good for the pupils and kids. And who are those people who know the best what works in any community in Finland? Obviously, they are the teachers and the people who are working in the school. And as long as you can follow this one, that you let those professionals and people who have been prepared to do those things to decide the most important things that matters for good teaching and learning, then things will work. But as soon as we start to intervene in these things and set these external expectations and standards and kind of determine how the school should be run and what exactly should be the outcomes and outputs of any given time, then we get into the trouble, because the nobody in Helsinki or in any capital center can really say what is the best for the kids and the individuals in any given community. One thing that people here in the United States often kind of misunderstand is that Finland also has one of the most decentralized, locally driven education systems in the world, because all these 300 districts or municipalities, as we call them, they decide how to run the schooling, and every single school in Finland designs their own curriculum.
There's no core curriculum like we have in the United States.
No, well, we have. It's not the core curriculum. It's called a framework, national framework for curriculum, which is that is a very broad document, and the purpose of that national document is to guide and steer the local planning of and standard setting. Right. So that's why it's a little bit different than people often ask me that, do you have common core standards in Finland? And I said we do not have a common core standards as you are trying to do now here, but we do have a national document that is kind of bringing this coherence and harmony.
Reading, writing, arithmetic, that kind of stuff, right?
It determines the subjects and the main, like for example, take mathematics in this national document. It basically specifies what is the purpose of teaching and learning mathematics in a school and what are the kind of broad ideas of designing the learning opportunities and learning environments for kids. But it doesn't say that in the fourth grade you have to teach these
teachers have a lot more autonomy.
Exactly.
And what I thought was interesting is that the teachers in Finland are not paid more than the teachers in the United States. That was surprising. Yet they hold a great deal more value and prestige from what I understand.
Exactly. Yes, I think the kind of a sense of empowerment now and social prestige and respect are much more important than pay for Finland. I think the art of setting the deciding how much teachers should be paid goes somewhere where there would be as few teachers, young people as possible, who would say that I would love to go to teaching, but I don't want to do that because of the pay is so poor, or that there would be a significant number of young people who would say that I want to go to teaching because they pay so well. And I think that Finland has been able to find exactly this kind of a golden balance between those things. That if you ask Finnish teachers now that are you happy with your pay, most of them would say that yes, that's fine. It could be a little bit better, but it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, that's what's kind of great because one of the things to talk about is the fact that teachers don't go into teaching for money.
No,
it's an art. It's got to be a passion, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it attracts a certain kind of person.
But I think, but in terms of the sort of the universals, I mean, Daniel Pink has a great book, Drive, and I mean, the desire for autonomy is universal. Like people want to make their own decisions.
I was going to say, that's where the incentive structure comes.
That's right. They want to be creative. I mean, those are those emotional rewards. And I think what you've seen in general in the United States, and this applies to the educational system, but is also increasingly happening in medicine, is that increasingly people are not being allowed to use their intelligence. There are these. Our idea is that we're going to improve quality control by having more rules, more structure, more regimentation.
Yeah.
And there's a certain logic to that, but that's the problem, is it's pure logic, and it doesn't have any empathy or any understanding of how human beings actually react in these situations.
Well, Professor, I remember one time that I was talking to a guy who worked on the Bush, in the Bush cabinet, and he said that he was talking about education. He said, well, the only way to really ensure quality education is through testing, and you've got to measure teacher performance, student performance through standardized testing. And he was, and this was, I think, after the No Child Left Behind kind of legislation and stuff. And he was talking about that and making an argument for it. But the Finnish system would suggest otherwise.
Absolutely, yes. I think Finnish system is not showing that the testing would be bad or wrong thing, but it certainly offers a kind of a model to think about a high-performing education system that can be run practically almost without any external standardized examinations. We only have one external standardized test, and that's at the very end of the high school when our students are already 18 or 19 years of age. So we are not employing any external standardized assessments on our children before they are old enough to understand, what does it mean, and that's why the answers to the legislators or citizens' questions in Finland, whether the system is working well or whether the taxpayers' money is well spent, is done by taking representative samples of schools and kids, and then testing them, measuring them, and then reporting back to the people that things are working. But we often argue that the census-based standardized assessments that you employ here a lot in the United States are not necessary for the purposes of answering these questions of whether the system is working well. So I think the United States is much over-tested and overspent on standardized testing. It really surprises me when I travel around here in this great country to find educators who say that they spend 60 days, 70 days, even 80 days a year on standardized testing related issues, and that's nonsense. It's madness that 1/3 or more of the school year goes to just collecting and measuring the data. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Amazing.
And also those tests, I mean, I think that's one of the other points you draw out well, is how expensive all that testing is. I mean, besides the cost in terms of teaching time, actually administering those tests actually costs a lot of money that could be spent elsewhere.
Well, not only that, you also the fact that testing requires, if you're testing, it emphasizes memorization and repetition. And Hunter and I were talking about the important, Hunter wrote a great book called The Straight A Conspiracy. He's been educating people for a long time here, and we were talking about the importance of context and concept. In learning, my children go to the Montessori school, and I've been very impressed with how they sort of teach those two concepts. And I think that seems to be missing.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you could say that if the United States wants to keep this current kind of a pace of standardized testing, the problem is part of the problem is that the tests are too low quality. That with the money that you are spending now on testing, you cannot get much better tests than what you are employing right now. So some people estimate here that the good kind of the tests that would be able to reliably measure these things that you want to get out of the school system, critical thinking, creativity, applying, using knowledge and problem solving, all these things, would cost probably 3 or 4 times per student at the student level than you spend now. So you should actually duplicate or triple your testing budgets if you want to do what you're doing right now, but have a kind of a high quality tests available. And that's why I think the only way here in the United States to figure this out is to simply drop much of the census-based standardized testing and assessment away and replace them with a higher quality sample-based assessments and get better data.
Are those ideas? I think those ideas hopefully will start to permeate. I know my wife was very excited that I was interviewing you because she's read a whole bunch about the Finnish school system because she's a mother and she has kids in school. I think that I'm always encouraged to hear that when my wife who gets excited about that. I don't think she's the only woman in this country who you know what I mean. I mean that's how things start to change. I think. Do you see any evidence of that?
Well, they are. First of all, there's a lot of kind of a citizen community movements right now taking place in different parts of the United States. Teachers are opting out to the standardized tests, and there was the big issue in state of Colorado some time ago where big proportion of the high school students didn't go to school when the high school the state mandated standardized tests were taking. This state here in Massachusetts, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a front cover story in the Boston Globe saying that because of the demand from and strong voice of parents and teachers and communities, the state has decided to review the possibility that the state is over-testing its kids. So this is happening everywhere here in the United States.
Once again, give me ammunition for why standardized testing. If someday in my fantasy, as you're talking, I had this fantasy of standing up in a school board meeting. I don't have time to go, but the point is, and saying no, we have to follow the Finnish example, and all heads turn to me and I probably look like a Viking, but not in real life. Yeah. I'm way too swarthy, and I don't have long legs or arms. Anyway, but tell me what I should say when I'm trying to save the educational system and all eyes are on me about standardized testing. Besides, it emphasizes memorization. It puts teachers and it takes away autonomy from teachers. It requires teachers to spend a great deal of time focusing their curriculum on test taking and the test thereof. So that requires memorization, not necessarily learning. And it puts everybody in a high stress situation.
Yeah. Well, the big change in this country would be if let's say to start with, if half of the current census-based standardized testing that different states do would be converted from a census-based to sample-based testing, which would mean that instead of testing every kid, every year on these selected subjects, the states would only test a sample, let's say 10%, just like your NAEP or the OECD's PISA study is doing, 10%, 12% of kids randomly selected, and then use that data to interpret the quality and the progress of the system. But I'll give you a little ammunition for this, and this is a real story. I was invited to I was visiting one of the states, and some of the politicians, legislators wanted to talk with me, and the same issue was raised there. I said, why don't you, in your state, make a plan to change some of these census-based standardized assessments that you're now employing and spending huge amounts of money there, creating all these things that you mentioned in the classroom and at the level of kids into sample-based tests. And there was some politicians there who were kind of doubtful that the sample-based testing would actually give the same information for the legislators and the taxpayers about how the things are going. So my question to one of them was that, tell me, how often do you go and see the medical doctor for a kind of an annual or regular health check? And he said that, what type of question is this? And I just, please answer me. And he said, I go once a year like anybody at my age should do. Then my next question was, tell me what happens in a doctor's clinic. How do they do that? And he said, again, what type of question is that? And I said, just tell me, please answer me this question. So he said, well, they do all these normal things like look at my eyes and ears and blood pressure, and then they took the blood sample, like 4 or 5 of these vials of blood. And I said, really? But they never suck all the blood out of your body? And he said, no, why they would do that? Because this, 4 or 5 of these samples is quite enough to do that. And I said, this is exactly how you can think about your education system. If you're just concerned about the health of your system,
wow,
that's what you do. But if you don't trust the medical examination that by looking at a small sample of your blood that you're really healthy, then you have next time you call, they just ask them to suck all the blood out of your body and test every single kind of a drop of your blood, and then put it back and say that you're fine.
I'll be stealing that. I'll be stealing that analogy.
Please do, because this person was really upset about this thing. He said, I never thought about this, and that was the end of the meeting. I don't know if they're going to do this, but I think it's exactly the same thing with our education systems, that if we want to know how things are working, if everything is all right or where the problems are, you don't need to test everybody all the time.
And that saves a lot of money, and it also helps reduce a lot of that stress. And I think
exactly, what all these successful education systems are doing, that rather than spending billions of dollars on collecting data and through testing kids, that they spend this money on improving schools and teachers and helping kids.
And I think the other thing that I was really, really telling is that even among successful educational systems, there's a real difference between, say, the Finnish experience and the South Korean experience. Yes, there are similarities, but you talked about that, Finnish students do much less homework than, for example, American kids, and certainly less than South Korean kids. And I thought the most telling study in there was that when they asked students how much stress they experienced at night when doing math homework, Finnish students, 7% of them experience anxiety. Korean and or Japanese and French students, it's 52 and 53%.
That's right.
And I can tell you, working with students in America, it's probably higher than that. They spend most of their time stressing about the homework and stressing about the material, and very, very little of their attention is actually devoted to learning.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Why is that? How do you avoid that?
Well,
I guess you don't put as much emphasis on tests.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research also showing that the amount of homework is not really doesn't have any positive correlation or association with the learning outcomes. It's often the opposite way, that if you just force people to do things that doesn't make any sense, then they should not be doing that altogether.
Yeah, it feels like you spend enough time in school. My God, you're from there 8 to 3. If you haven't learned something from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, then there's something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also, a lot of what this all fits into is, we talked about this before the interview, and Bryan and I have talked about this. It's the big data movement. Since the Enlightenment, we've really been focused on making sure that we can quantify everything. But what we never take appreciation of is the fact that not everything is equally quantifiable.
Yeah,
it's very hard to quantify, how stressed are students, how are they feeling, are they actually really understanding these concepts, right? You talked about the differences between tests that would actually measure understanding versus tests that test memorization. So that what ends up happening is that, in your desire to quantify things, you quantify this distorted picture that actually ends up making things worse rather than better.
Yeah. You know, when I came here, I lived in Washington D.C. For 5 years before, but I'm fine now. By the way,
I was going to say.
But now when I
Washington D.C., where innovation goes to die, where it goes to die.
But I came now this time when I came here about a year ago, and I continued asking these questions: that why do we need to quantify all these things? Why do we need to measure so much, try to measure everything? And one of my colleagues here said that, you have to understand one thing here in the United States, that many people think that if it moves here, it must be measured. and that everything is not only about education, but it's most of these things.
Health is all about calories and how much fat you're taking.
Yeah. And, that's the country where I come from, and the culture is very different, because we think differently about many things, and certainly when it comes to education, these most important things, like I think it was Einstein who was saying that the most important things can never be measured. That we can only measure the things that we can measure, but the most important things in education, you cannot really quantify them or measure them reliably unless you rely on teachers and learners' own assessment and reflection. And this is what we try to do in Finland more and more now, so that we ask everybody within the education system to think about how they're learning, what they're doing, and whether this is good enough.
When did this happen? When did this movement? Because I would imagine.
And you call the movement GERM in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this global educational reform movement, this GERM movement, that is built on competition between schools, standardization, standardized testing, accountability, all these deprofessionalization of teaching. It all started somewhere in the late, my estimated, probably in the late 1980s, when England introduced the famous Education Reform Act that kind of brought these market-based ideas into teaching, and it got really speed and accelerated here in North America in the 1990s because of the standards movement and a kind of a testing industry that was building in, and then spread around the world later on through consulting firms and international development agencies and internet and the kind of opening media, so that it's a truly a kind of a educational infection now, disturbing many countries and many education systems to do things in a different way. So that's why people often see Finland as a kind of a one of the very few real antidotes to this germ infection, where things are done not only in a little bit different way, but often in an opposite way that you can find in these germ-infected countries.
And of course, the testing industry loves the germ movement.
Because they probably have a strong lobbying effort in Washington. I mean, now I can see that the testing industry is big money.
Sure.
And the one of the other things that I really loved in the book was, obviously Nokia is a huge part of Finland's industry, and there's that fantastic quote where, you invited Nokia to actually take part in having a conversation about what should be happening in Finland's schools to create the sort of workers they need. And the guy from Nokia basically said that don't worry too much about teaching them specific facts. Like, we'll have somebody at the company who can teach them those things. Mm-hmm. Just don't make them afraid to ask questions and fail and all of those sorts of things.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, and this was a secret of Nokia, and probably continues to be the secret of the whole Finnish society. Finland again is a different country. This is one of the few countries where we have an annual day to celebrate failure. It's October 13th. Yeah, October 13th is a kind of a national celebration for failure in Finland, so that we try to encourage people to fail more often and learn from those things. And I was speaking about this National Failure Day in Finland in October 13 last week, actually, in one of the conventions here, and there was somebody in the audience who said that we also have a National Day of Failure here in the United States, but it's every other year, and it's a first Tuesday in November.
That's great.
It took me a while to understand what it meant, but everybody else seemed to be entertained about this fact.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just had one of those.
Yeah. and we succeeded in failing.
Oh, yeah.
But so I think that's the thing, is that as Americans look at their failing school system, there's a real tendency to want to fix it and to control it, and that the surprising solution, and this fits into the Hans Monderman thing, is that actually the key to fixing it may actually be to loosen some of those constraints, to allow more liberty. Because if you want teachers to think and you want students to think, then you have to actually trust them to think for themselves.
Yeah, that's right. I see this a little bit different way. First of all, I do not think, I wouldn't say that the American public school system is a failing system. Mm-hmm. If you look at the how the system is performing in the international comparisons, for example, the OECD's PISA study, that the U.S. school system as a whole is a fairly close to the international averages in terms of the quality of the learning outcomes, and also the equity, how the system is able to serve and help these huge diversities where the education system is operating within one of the most unequal nations, wealthy nations in the world. But the education system is still able to equalize and provide opportunities to many students here and children that they in many other countries don't. So for me, the system is not working well, but it's not really failing system.
It's not a disaster.
If there's anything failing here, I think that the society as a whole is failing many of these individuals, and particularly children, when they come to school. You have 23% of your children in the school system are coming from poor homes, and I think this is a failure, if anything. That and if the school system is not doing enough to help those who come from homes and circumstances where they have much less than most kids in other systems do, then it's no wonder that the learning.
Well, I had a principal I met in Kansas, and I said, "So what do we do about the school system?" And he said, "School system's fine. It's the parents. Fix the parents." I thought that was kind of interesting, And in a way, he was probably, he was on to something.
Yeah. So I think we should always remember here that the teachers that you have in your school system, most of them are doing really, really great job, and most of them are doing everything they can to work in this very unequal.
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. I really believe that. Do you though think that the teacher? I always hear the teachers' union being demonized because nothing gets done. They get tenure too quickly. There's no motivation and all that stuff. You can't get rid of bad teachers and replace them with good ones because the ones that have tenure. What do you think of the teachers' union in this country? I'm sure it's a dicey subject, maybe, but what is that part of the problem?
No, I don't know if it's part of the problem. I think that just like the education system as a whole, the administration and certainly the politics has to change. I think there's also room for change among the teacher unions, what their policies are, what they do, and how they work with or against the rest of the society. I think that in this country, before it can really move forward, everybody needs to change from the point that they are doing right now. And I think that the teacher union, the unions actually should be part of the change. And I know that the unions actually they know this, and there are these teacher union reform networks and others that are trying to find another way for teachers to organize. I think it's if you look at the most successful education systems, one of the common features in all of them is that the rate of organization of teaching force is very high. In Finland, it's 95%. In many Canadian provinces, 100% of teachers are organized.
They all have unions, in other words.
They all have unions, but the unions, if you look at the Canadian teacher associations, for example, they are much more like professional associations, like you have here, the associations for lawyers and doctors and some others, that they do much more kind of a professional work with their members than just a kind of a union related thing. So that's why I think there are a lot of good examples around the world for teacher unions here in the United States and many other countries to also look at the mirror and see that what would be the next generation way of organizing teachers, helping them to do what they do.
If I were to give you, I'll put you on the spot, and I were to say to you, Professor, I want you to change the American school system. I'm giving you five. I give you five broad stroke, I guess, powers. You can 5 wishes, five. You can change 5 things. What would they be?
Well, the first thing certainly would be to change the entire testing and accountability system. I think it's holding many other things back from working for the system and for the children. So that would be one thing. I would do much less testing. I would redefine what accountability means. Actually, I would probably get rid of the whole accountability term and call it a professional responsibility here. Then I would certainly spend more money that would be released from this first thing to help teachers and schools invest more money on professional development, but not necessarily money on, improving individual teachers, but find ways how to invest money in collaboration of teachers. And this would probably require lowering the teaching load of most of your teachers a little bit, so that they will have time to
swap notes and ideas.
Yeah, time to work together. Then I would try to make some changes in the initial teacher education, teacher preparation programs. Some people tell me now that there are 2,000 different agencies and programs licensing teachers.
Wow.
Somebody told me that the other day here that the country should close down immediately half of them, and it doesn't really make too much difference which half would it be.
Wow.
So that would be one change. Then fourthly, I think there should be a different type of conception of educational leadership at the level of the schools. I would like to see a system here where only experienced teachers and educators, maybe experienced teachers, would have a kind of access to lead the school and maybe even lead the district school system, so that it would be at the hands of educators. And finally, which would probably should be my first thing to do, is to return and restore play time into each and every school. In other words, bring more music, more arts, more physical education, make a proper recess between every teaching block or lesson in every school, compulsory thing as it is in Finland. I think this playtime and kind of a stolen playtime and the fact that many schools do not have recess anymore.
That's incredible to me. I can't imagine not having recess.
Yeah, and it's you see this in many ways, but one of the things that you see this is that the rate of children who are diagnosed to have ADHD in this country has gone through the roof.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying that this is because of the things that only has happened, these worsening things in the school system, but if if you are in a situation right now in America where you have 12% of your 3 to 17-year-old boys having a label of being
12%.
Carrying
Wow.
ADHD,
wow.
Then you need to do something in the school
That's
system.
A lot. That's a lot.
Yeah,
12%.
you need to give these kids time to play and climb the tree and hang around during the school day so that they can get this
not
steam out.
Not put them on Ritalin. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I was in one of the states here in New England speaking last week, and that state has 10% of the teaching, the curriculum time in primary schools is devoted to arts and music and physical education. In Finland, the same thing is 33%.
Wow.
So it's,
and Massachusetts is one of the best performing states in terms of education.
Yeah. So that would be one in the very high in my agenda, is to make sure that every school in every state, every district must have enough time for kids to play, do their own things, move, and that's the best way to help them learn better.
And John Rady has written about in Spark the power of physical exercise to be able to ameliorate ADHD.
Yeah. We all know that very well, that this is this should be the way to go. But somehow the things are just going backwards.
Well, you may know that very well, but I think the problem is the average American voter doesn't know that very well. And so what ends up happening is that the narrative is our schools are failing, more accountability. And that makes sense, except that then you realize, that means stripping out recess, which means that kids are in worse physical shape, which means that they're more distractible, which means they learn less. That's not necessarily obvious to...
I think every school should have a picture of my torso up on the wall.
As inspiration.
As inspiration.
Or winspiration.
Or winspiration.
That's right.
I mean, winspiration.
But I think the other interesting thing too is that it's not just that Finland has much lower ADHD rates. It's also that there's much less of a tendency to resort to medication. Isn't that also true?
Yeah, it's true. And I'm often saying people here that don't make a mistake with Finland. We do have the same thing as here. The difference is that here, when people call it ADHD, in Finland we call it childhood.
Oh man!
And
That's
you fix
great.
it with a little dose of recess.
Yeah. And if that doesn't help, in most cases when people are 18 or 20, this disease has disappeared.
Yeah,
unless you're me.
Yeah, well, so some people suffer it all their lives, which is quite fine.
Unfortunately. But but it does seem like kids learn when they're allowed to follow their curiosity.
Absolutely.
It seems like a much better idea. And one of the biggest Finnish lessons is decentralization. Allow teachers, give them more autonomy. Let them come up with their own curriculum. You have a very broad agenda for what I guess the national standards are. You got to test. I love the analogy of taking blood. I'm going to be using all of these and taking credit for it.
That's most of what
this
is mostly what the point of the podcast is. It's to allow Bryan to steal things from.
Well, I just want to look smarter. What are you talking about? I just like to impress everybody. It's not about changing.
I have a little question for you. Dedicate one of these things to my grandmother.
I will do it. I will. I love it.
I don't care about myself, but I love my grandmother.
You've done a great job, and Hunter and I always talk about the best ideas are often stuck in books, and that's kind of what we try to get out here is to somebody like yourself. You're doing very important work and saying very important things, and I think that. Every mother and father out there in this country, or a lot of them at least, would be very interested in this. And I think a lot of teachers would. I think there are a lot of, like you said, I think whether they're in the teacher union or whether they're in private school, this is a very interesting thing. And I think that it would not be lost on most of our educators.
Yeah, and what is it kind of people often ask me is that so do I see any hope here in America with these things? And I say that every time I go when I speak with the kind of people here in the communities and conventions and events about this Finnish. I speak about the same things. I tell about exactly what we have been speaking about now here. I always get 10, 20, 25 emails, phone calls back, and people say that, you know what, I didn't know about that. I didn't know that Finland is doing these things, that the rest of the world is doing things in a different way. Many of them, they say that they believe that the way things are going here is a kind of a right way. That America is not just doing enough of these. That we need more of the same things. And I say that the hope is here that people are listening here much more than they used to do 10 years ago when I lived in Washington D.C. and I tried to speak about these same things. People had much more of this, that we know what to do and. The other countries cannot really offer any advice or help to the United States. But now I see, much more. Wherever I go here, people always say that I want to have a conversation. I want to learn more. I want to kind of understand, what's going on, and then find ways what to do. I receive emails and letters from high school students who are studying these things and surprised that they find so different things in different countries. And I think that's a great thing. It may take a little bit more time. Winston Churchill said it nicely. You can steal this one also from me if you want. But he said that you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they have tried everything else.
God bless.
What a great slogan for education reformers here. Just go ahead and keep on doing this, spend your money, and in the end of the day, you'll figure out what is the kind of best.
I think that's going to start to happen and is happening on a local level.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if 5-6 years from now, most people are saying, "Well, my kid's in the Finnish school system." I don't know if you know that, but the Finns have a school. You'll see that happens all the time. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Well, we will talk about the book. We will tweet the book, and you've done great work. We appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time. And maybe, just maybe, this podcast is the tipping point. Maybe this is when it all changes. Yeah. This is the tidal wave, baby. So
I'd spend the rest of the day obsessively checking your Amazon ranking.
Yeah, that's right. Pasi Sahlberg, written Finnish Lessons.
Please know that there's a new edition, much improved and updated edition coming of the book in about a month or 6 weeks, called Finnish Lessons 2.0. It's the same book, but it's a much better and updated. There's all the new stuff in the book. So if you mention this, be sure to give people the right information. And it's also much cheaper than the first one.
Well, listen, if you have more you want to say, you come back on the podcast anytime, because I find it fascinating, and we are more than happy to have you back anytime you want. You have a standing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. This is great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
It was great. Pasi Sahlberg, ladies and gentlemen, Finnish Lessons.
The Lord of Finnish.
The Lord of all things learning.
Yes. All right.
Okay, sir.
Thank you so much. I'll do my best.
There
Bye-bye.
you go. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you learned about the Finnish school system. If you're listening to this podcast and you happen to be anywhere close to San Diego, you might want to come and laugh as well. And believe me, you will learn there too. I'll be at the American Comedy Company in San Diego Thursday, November, what is that date, everybody? 20th? November 20th, 21st, 22nd. I'm down at the American Comedy Company. I love it down there. It's going to be a great show because apparently I'm very funny. I want to thank the people from Tempe and Ontario. You people rock, man. That was the craziest. Ontario, California. I'm telling you, the Inland Empire, great crowds. I had a blast. I felt privileged. November 20th, 21st, 22nd, I'm going to be at the American Comedy Club, Company, actually, in San Diego. Come see me. You can touch me afterwards, and I look a lot better in person. Tall, broad, supple. Back to Finnish Lessons.
For most people, the camera adds pounds, but apparently for you, it takes away inches.
That's right, brother. That's exactly right. And Hunter Motz gets a lot of love at my shows. I'm impressed. You will never, ever, it'll never be called the Hunter Motz Bryan Callen Show.
I know.
My name is always first.
But also, it may not even be called the Bryan Callen Show anymore. It may be called
the mother of all podcasts.
Please don't sue us, Superband Europe.
Right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. God bless.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.